Os doy la bienvenida a este primer episodio de Librísimo del 2026. Como siempre os digo, para apoyarnos podéis suscribiros al canal, dejar vuestros comentarios o un buen me gusta, y para disfrutar del programa podéis hacerlo en el canal de YouTube o en modo podcast en iVoox. Tenemos la suerte de que hoy nos visite Malcolm Devlin, que viene a presentarnos Y entonces desperté, una novela distópica de terror con prólogo de Antonio Torrubia y publicada por Obscura. Los cuentos de Malcolm han aparecido en publicaciones como Black Static, INTERZONE, The Shadow Booth y Shadows and Daughters. Su primera colección, You Will Grow Into Them, fue publicada por Unsung Stories en el 2017 y quedó finalista de los premios British Fantasy y Saboteur. Actualmente vive en Brisbane, Australia. Y sin más preámbulos, os invito a acompañarnos. Hello, everybody. This is our 42nd episode and the first of 2026. I can't believe there's already been more than 40 authors with us in Spanish and in English. You know that if you are watching this in YouTube, you're not familiar with, listening to things in English, you can activate the settings to see the transcription in Spanish. But I think you should start trying to get the heck of things in English, because it's very, very, very easy, believe me. And we are here today with someone from the other side of the world, if we think in terms of Spain, somebody who's right now in Brisbane, Australia, and it's nothing less than Malcolm Devlin. Hi, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
We are very, very, very happy and thrilled that you're here because we have a very, very good excuse, which is your upcoming book in Spanish. Y entonces desperté is the title in Spanish, and it's and then I woke up. This novel is coming up with Obscura, and the forward is by Antonio Torrubia. It's a very well-known person within the community. You all know who he is. He's the El Librero del Mal. And it's a very peculiar horror story. I'm not sure it's a horror story because you start saying it's a love story, and I don't want to go into spoilers. We will just tell whatever you want to reveal, which I think not too much because it will spoil everything. But I want to know about the genesis of the novel a little bit. And I think the best way is by the title. We always ask our guests about the title, why they chose And Then I Woke Up. Why this title?
That's an interesting one. I didn't start with a title for this one. I think the title, it sort of ended up becoming stronger as it went on. It sort of made more sense that this is what it's supposed to be called as it sort of happened. I've always been interested in this whole idea that one of the big errors of writing is to end with the protagonist waking up and discovering that everything that's just happened is a dream, because obviously normally it's a complete cop-out, or it's the worst possible outcome that you can have for a story when you become invested in something and discover that none of it's true. And so I think I was interested in a story in which, by doing that, rather than it dismissing the story that you think that you've understood, it actually makes things worse, or it gives it a different complexion to what you might have thought it was supposed to be. And so I thought going straight in with that and starting with that as a title, I don't know. I wouldn't say it's necessarily provocative, but it feels like a bit of a joke, perhaps.
Then I thought about some guidelines of some publications in the English-speaking market, which say literally don't write stories where what happens is everything has been a dream. And I thought, when I read your story, I felt like, okay, somebody's trying to be anti-establishment in a way.
A little bit. I mean, it's a weird taboo, isn't it? I mean, I think that one of the other things that people say about writing instructions, like all of the advice that you're given, is that pretty much all of it can be broken if you approach it from the right way, probably. I should say that I don't, that in And Then I Woke Up, it isn't necessarily all a dream. It's not quite as simple as that,
No.
but it certainly plays with that idea a little bit.
And I love the way you play with ideas. We were going to talk about that a little later. I wanted to know if you remember where were you and when was that you come up with the idea, with the original idea, the seed of this story?
I think, in my experience, I think that when I'm sort of planning something, or when I'm when I'm sort of thinking over a story, it's often when several separate ideas sort of come together and start sticking together that the actual story seems to make sense. So I think this was based on a number of different ideas from various places. There's I remember watching so the story contained addresses. It's quite hard to talk about, isn't it? It's been a while since I've actually had to talk about it, and it's quite hard to address it without giving away spoilers. But it's the story purports to be taking place within what looks like a traditional zombie apocalypse of the kind of the George Romero film type version. I've seen quite a few films like that after those sort of films. I very much like the George Romero films, The Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead, and so on. And he's he's not massively subtle when it comes to satire, but there is satire in them, and it's entertaining and it's good. And there's a sort of extra layer there. But an awful lot of films that came after it, after those films, one of the things that struck me about them was an awful lot of them seem to veer towards survivalist fantasies, where they're more about people finding themselves in a situation where it was okay that they'd stored all these guns in the cellar, and they now had a whole subset of people that they were perfectly legitimately allowed to kill off. And I always thought that was just a little bit weird. And then I was watching, I caught the end of an episode of, I think it was it The Walking Dead, I think, which I hadn't really been following, I confess. And I did wonder, imagine if they ended this series by just having them all waking up. And how their fan base would react to that.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of other things sort of came in and sort of stuck with that. And then I sort of ended up thinking, actually, this is the direction I'd like to go with this.
And the world that you depict in this novel, it's a story where there's an infection. We're not going to talk about the particulars, but there's an infection. People get sick, and people supposedly are not sick. So it's like there's two kinds of people. And then there's people in between, I would say. And kind of like you chose a very familiar setting, is like our world. And one of the things and it was very interesting, is that normally there's a lot of violence in this type of stories. And in this one, there is also, we are not going to be shy about it, but also there's a lot of compassion. And you make a point about that also, a very important point. I'm not going to get into much, but it is important for you. I thought about what you tried to do, which was always kind of like deviate from what anybody would think this type of story should go, and propose things that I don't think have been proposed exactly like this. And so when we think about people, zombie stories, for example, no, which is other type of infections, I think apart from surviving itself, the stories are about the links that you make with other people in order to survive, like how the collective comes together, communities form or groups form, right? And this is part of your also of the tissue of your story. We talk about different groups and the dynamics in these groups. So I would like to know about this world. Were you thinking about the UK? It was non-specific. It was Western. What were you thinking, and what was your the reference for you to build this type of world that we don't really know when we read exactly what it's set?
No. So that's an interesting one. So the idea was I've always found that the zombie genre, for example, is I think predominantly quite an American-centric genre, because I think in the same way that I was mentioning beforehand about the idea of survivalist fantasies, I think a lot of it goes hand in hand with the gun culture that you get
Yeah.
in places like in
Yes.
America specifically. And so the idea of that kind of response to that kind of outbreak, the idea that people might have an entire arsenal in their basement, isn't the sort of thing that would happen in a lot of other places. And I think it's also a very sort of cinematic genre. So most of the primary texts, if you like, are cinematic rather than literary.
Yeah.
So if you look outside the US, in the UK, you've got Shaun of the Dead, where they make a big joke about the fact there is one gun in the entire of London or something. So I wanted, when I was coming up with a place, I wanted normally, when I normally write stories, I normally set them in the UK, which is where I'm most familiar.
Yeah.
Because I'm based in Brisbane, I'm from the UK. And so, but this one, that didn't really fit with setting it in the places that I'm not most be familiar with. So I wanted to set in a slightly vaguer place, which could be mistaken for potentially an American city or potentially or a other city. I actually borrowed a lot of place names and street names from Brisbane, which is where I'm living at the moment. And a lot of readers from Brisbane have noticed this, and they've gone, well, that's clearly that, but this is all completely wrong. And so I sort of borrowed locations just to sort of give it a bit of a structure, but I wanted the whole place to be the sort of place that could be mistaken for something that people might have seen in an American film, or people might have read in a sort of American type of book instead. It's not because I'm not American, because I don't think I could really bluff that kind of thing completely. I sort of tried to sort of threading the needle and sort of doing something a little bit between things, but I hope I got away with that.
Yeah, and also with the characters, no. The one of the fun parts of the story is that it's narrated in first person, and there's a particular I really like the way you start the chapters, and then it's what happened, and this is what happened, and so we're gonna talk about narrativity and because it's a very important part of the story and the plot without giving away. But let's talk about the characters. I would like to start with Spence, which is who is the narrator. Who is Spencer?
So Spence is your pretty much archetypal survivor character from, again, kind of like the zombie movie. However, I think he wouldn't necessarily fit in that world. He starts off thinking that he's one thing, and then I think he sort of finds himself somewhere else. Essentially, I think he's a character I think an awful lot of the main characters in these kind of stories are essentially sort of quite. I wouldn't necessarily describe them as vacuums or blank slates, but I think they're the sort of the point where things happen around, or the point where they sort of witness things rather than actually being involved directly themselves. So I think he's more of he's quite. I think what I think he's mistaken for a lot of things that he isn't necessarily, and I think he's not entirely sure what he is anymore. And so he's sort of lost an awful lot of references, points to who he actually was, and so I think he's defining himself by the people around him a lot of the time. I'm not sure if that makes any sense.
No, it does, because also we talked about earlier, or I talked about earlier, about these groups of people and then people that are kind of like in between. And I think he's kind of like probably one in-between person who it's part of one group, but then it's part of another group, and then we don't really know. And also because he's the one telling the story, it's completely unreliable. Well, that's what the theory says, that you cannot trust somebody who's just telling things from their point of view. But I think he's much more than that. And when you read the story, I'm telling you, you have to read it because you're going to really enjoy it. And then we have two female characters, Macy and Layla. And they're very important in the plot. I wanted to know, how did you decide those? Because it's true that Spencer is the narrator, but I wouldn't say is necessarily the main character. He's telling the story and tells the story many times in different ways also. But who are Macy and Layla in this kind of like in this story?
So one of the ideas in the story, is this still working?
Yes.
Is this sort of idea that there are followers and essentially leaders or protagonists. And Spence is one of the followers. He basically sort of just goes around obeying what sort of other people do, whereas other people are sort of full believers in whatever situation they're in at the moment. I wanted Macy to be an example of someone who was charismatic and interested, but also who was sort of quite familiar with narrative from a sort of writing point of view. I think it's quite funny, the idea that in this situation you end up with all these sort of backyard survivalists and genre writers as potentially being on the same side and both being sort of succumbing to this situation the same way. The other character is more like Spencer, so she's more on a level with Spence, but he sees her from the outside, whereas he didn't see his own situation in her; he sees her situation. And so it's his opportunity essentially to be able to sort of see what this might look like from the outside, I think. And her story is quite different from his, and she sort of came from a place where she had an actual sort of proper solid sort of a life which has been left behind, whereas he sort of is just sort of drifting from place to place. So I wanted that as a sort of a contrast to going from the outside, from the top, sorry.
And as I said before, you start saying this is a love story, which I also thought it was kind of, I don't know if the word is provocative, but at least you try to be to differ from what we normally see in this type of stories, which is, yes, there are love stories in this type of stories, and normally they're quite tragic. This is not there is tragedy, of course, there is trauma, of course, that when there is this type of story, but this is deeper than that and makes you think about mental health, not just from a personal point of view, but collectively. Because, and this is something that really, really interests me because I've kind of explored myself in some of my stories, is the kind of like collective, I call it collective madness that you can get when, for example, you're trapped in an impossible situation or a very harsh situation to be in. Or, for example, I wrote a story where, there's a gigantic planetary sandstorm that ravages Earth, and people had to go and live in domes. But that drives everybody nuts because, the situation is completely unnatural. So that's something that, and they don't know, they don't realize they're getting mad. That's something that interests me, the way you navigate between this fine line between what is it to be mad, what is it, and what means to be not mad, and who sets what's madness and what's not, and who are we to judge. I'm sure there's medical terms to and criteria to differentiate, but there are certain points or certain moments that or situations that this line is very blurry, and I love the way you address that. And also I think it transpires also that you are a writer, you're an author, because not necessarily writing, but narrative and theory of narrativity or theory of narrative plays an important role in a very subtle, but it's constant I think anybody who's an author or he loves reading and occasionally writes would love this story. And I just would like to know, how did you come up with that particular, with that? I don't want to say what it is, with that.
Oh gosh. Um, I think it's predominantly, I think it comes through, so I'm using that word a lot. I think it comes through mostly from once the idea of the story had come about, trying to figure out where its logical conclusion would be and sort of pushing it towards the end. And from my point of view and from my experience and what I do, I sort of found myself sort of going down those particular cul-de-sacs, I suppose. But I found the story because I wanted to keep it sort of tight, and I didn't want to repeat myself. I think it'd be quite easy to sort of just keep repeating. And so I was trying to avoid that, but I was trying to sort of push it as far as so I could from a logical point of view, I suppose. So in terms of once I sort of set up what was supposed to be happening, I suppose it was sort of quite interesting. So just seeing where the story would then go. It's almost like I sort of just sort of bound it up, and then I was sort of going, oh, where are we going here with it? And then it's going here. And so an awful lot of this was sort of finding its own way,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, totally. I know it's, somebody told me once, well, I think it was China maybe. I interview him and he says something kind of like similar in a way that he creates something and then he thinks about the logic of it at the end. And retrofits anything and makes it work, but it doesn't think about the logic in the beginning. He just goes along and puts anything he wants and he likes and he enjoys in the story, and then
Yeah.
he works out how is this going to be logical. So I love the way that you put it up, because I think it's along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways the story was following the logic for me because I think that some of the uh, again, it's quite hard to talk about without
Yes.
talking about it. But once I sort of set up that premise and how that's supposed to be working, once that had come through, then actually sort of following up how that would go, because I think it would be. I mean, it's interesting as well because the whole idea of people's sort of perception of reality and so forth sort of falling apart, and the sort of the structures that you think are supposed to be in place not being able to be supported with those, which I think we're kind of seeing a bit of now anyway. I mean, the
Yes.
one thing that's been frustrating about the book is it was originally written in 2019, I think, and it's still weirdly topical, and
Yes.
and so it's still sort of pursuing its way through the thing, and I'm going, oh, this has nothing to do with me anymore.
And I also wanted to know about, what was for you the easiest and the most difficult thing about on writing this story. The most challenging and the easiest.
The most challenging parts I find are the we were talking about beforehand about there being sort of violence and gore scenes. I think I found the action scenes, because there is one action scene pretty much near the set in a restaurant.
Yes.
I found that very challenging to do because it did feel like trying to maintain a pace. I'm writing action scenes isn't something that I've had a huge amount of experience with, and so I found that quite tough to get everything so that it lined up and there's a kind of logical sense of one thing happening, another thing happening, space and blocking, like you're sort of shooting a movie scene, for example. But I found that quite tough to do, so that took several revisions. Um, some of the parts which were more straightforward didn't come until later drafts, I think. So there's a whole episode which is depicted on the cover, this gorgeous cover by Samaria. He it's a scene set in a pink room, which
Yes.
originally wasn't in the first draft. It was just sort of referenced in passing, and I thought, "No, actually, I want to go back and do that." And so I went back and did that, and I really, really enjoyed putting that part together. And so that sort of it's a much stranger scene, but that was much, much more straightforward to sort of that came out sort of pretty much fully formed.
And I'm so happy that you mentioned the pink room, because when I was reading it, it sent me vibes from David Lynch. I thought this is something that David Lynch would super enjoy.
That's what I love about the cover as well, because the cover is very much it looks like Francis Bacon
Yes.
in Twin Peaks, and it's wonderful.
And I thought also it was a great a great an ingredient that make a lot of sense. And I'm like, I have to confess, I love to underline the text when I'm reading it. And I was underlining, I was like, I haven't underlined a book so much lately. So yours is fully, underlined with so many sentences. And it's, what I really like is the way that it's not a very long novel, which I really
No.
appreciate. I think that sometimes you don't need to have like a 300-page, book to tell a story, but everything is there and everything you need, it's just there. And I thank you for that, because it was very enjoyable and easy to read and fast, and I couldn't stop. I really couldn't. I know this is a cliche, but it's the truth. So I was just thinking, I would love to be in his head, and what was he thinking when he thought about placing those things there. And I also wanted to talk about, you mentioned the drafts. For me as an author, this is something that I really enjoy asking the people who visit us. And it's about the process of writing the story. And I would like to know if you remember more or less, how many drafts did you write of the story, and did you have someone involved, like an editor or beta readers, to help you finish the story or polish the story?
Um, yeah, absolutely. So I can't remember the exact number of drafts, I'm
But
afraid.
yeah.
It was more than one. I got it to a certain point where I sent it to um, Ellen Datlow, who edited it, and she came back with some structural advice that she thought before she wanted to take it any further. Um, one aspect of which was to bring the reveal of what was happening essentially a lot closer to the beginning. So beforehand, that happened some point in about two-thirds of the way through, I think. And so that was brought forward, and that was the main change. And then a lot of other stuff was sort of rearranged from there. And once that had been done, and she accepted, we sort of went from there. And then there sort of further sort of drafts after Tor had picked it up.
And do you normally like write the whole thing and then just rewrite, or you rewrite as you go?
Both.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of go back and tinker with stuff as I'm moving forward, just to sort of shore up where I'm going. But then once I've come up with finished the thing, then I'll try and redo the whole thing from scratch. Um, Sometimes it'll be a case of sort of just printing it out and retyping it to try and catch anything that I've missed. And other times it'll be putting it in a drawer, reading it, or sort of reading it, putting it in a drawer, not the other way around, obviously, and then trying to rewrite it from memory to see if I can do something better. But which is something that's easy to do with a short story, a shorter book. So, but it's somewhat more onerous with a longer one.
That's a very interesting thing. Is put it away and try to recreate or replicate it from memory. I never thought about that. It's interesting.
I found it works very well with short stories because, well, partly because they're short, and just to try and sort of put it together from how you what you remember, what you take away, because sometimes you can get bogged down in stuff which isn't actually relevant to the story, and I think that's quite interesting to see what comes up at the end.
And do you use beta readers, and something that you normally use, take their input? How do you
Uh,
work with them?
yeah, absolutely. So I send it to a bunch of friends or people that I know just to sort of try and get some feedback and see what sort of things come back from that. Um,
And just to just kind of like start to wrapping up this conversation. First of all, I have to tell everybody who's watching or listening to us, you have to read this book. I
Thank you.
wanted to know the path of publication with Obscura, which is your Spanish publisher. How did this happen? They approach you? How was it?
Yes, they got in touch and asked if the rights were available, and we took it from there. Basically,
Is it the first translation of the story?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's incredibly flattering to be asked. Because I've had a couple of short stories translated into Spanish, but nothing of this length. So it's very exciting to see what happens from there.
I just wanted to mention that this novel is not super long. I mean, it's quite easy to read in the sense that it's. I have read it in English and I read it in digital, so I'm not sure the length in physical, but I don't think it's something like 300 pages. I think it's much, much less. I don't know.
Yes, I imagine so.
Yeah.
It's, my copy is about 170 pages in the UK, in English edition, sorry.
So it's quite viable to read. And as I said, the pace is so good and the flow is so good that you're going to read it with no problem. And it has a foreword, as I mentioned before, by Antonio Torrubia, who's going to add so much, telling you some very interesting things about the story and references. And I would like to know, for everybody that's watching and listening, what are you working on in terms of stories, if you can tell us?
Yes, I'm in a slightly awkward phase at the moment where I have a bunch of things which I'm trying to find homes for. So, which is always a little bit tricky. But I've got a couple of projects which I'm very excited by, which I would like to really sort of push further. So it all depends on what I can find homes for them at the moment.
Is it in short form or longer?
They're slightly longer, about twice as long perhaps as And Then I Woke Up, but still compact. But
yeah. And so this is something that we ask everybody also that comes, because we feed from our guests in terms of who they would love to have, who would they love to see in our space here in the cyberspace. And if you could invite somebody to be with us in LIBRISIMO, it has to be somebody alive. That's the only rule.
Somebody alive.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you prefer somebody that I know, or somebody that I would sort of, that's a kind of like reaching for the stars type thing?
Up to you. It's entirely up to you. Whatever you prefer.
I mean, I would absolutely recommend you get in touch with Helen Marshall, if you could, who is just her second novel's just come out. It's called The Lady, the Tiger, and the Girl Who Loved Death. And I mean, I'm slightly biased here because I'm married to it, but it's an absolutely extraordinary book, and I do really wish it had got more. I'm just going to show you the cover because the cover's gorgeous.
Yeah, that's very nice. It's super.
If you want to push that further, I don't know. There's a lot of. I would definitely like to see Helen somewhere, but.
We hope that her work would be translated and we can have it here for sure. And so this is a call out.
I'd absolutely recommend it. It's tremendous.
Yeah, it's a call out for all the publishers out there. And just our last question is, if you could recommend a book to our listeners and viewers that you really liked recently, it doesn't have to be the one that you from all your life, just recently, which one would be? Because we're building this virtual library with the suggestions from our guests.
A book that I enjoyed recently is Nina Allen, her new novel, The Granite Silence, which is tremendous. It starts off as a true crime book, and then it drifts off into some very interesting and unexpected places, and it's extraordinary. And it explores an actual true crime of a girl who was murdered up in Scotland, in Aberdeen. But it's incredibly compassionate about both all the people who are involved, and then pushing it further into some very strange territories, including some more speculative stories, and ending with a ghost story based on from the point of view of the character had she survived. And it's just, I've never read anything like it. And I know that Nina's had a lot of success recently in France, and so I'm hoping that she's going to get some wider translation. But A Granite Silence is, there we go, got a copy of this one as well.
Wow. Yeah, we're
absolutely
very
glorious
big
book.
fans of Nina. We know
Yeah.
her work, and we can wait to see her also succeeding in Spanish. And well, I wanted to thank you for give us generously your time to be with us in Librisimo. I cannot stop recommending your book. I'm gonna keep on recommending your book, and you can find it in Obscura, in the website, as well as in the normal venues that you buy guys books from. And thank you, Malcolm, and I hope that maybe we can see you again with another of your stories translated in Spanish in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And to all of you, please stay tuned because we're coming back with more books and more authors.